Hi, my name is Patrick Tyler, and I'm here to introduce my new book. Fortress Israel is the story of a military society and of a powerful defense establishment and a ruling elite that has found it very difficult over the decades to make peace. And the reason is that the institutions of peace in Israel, the foreign ministry, the institutions of diplomacy, of negotiation, of statesmanship and compromise and accommodation have never developed in a way that makes them competitive with the overarching influence of the military establishment. Now, this book is not about the Arab world, but it must be said that the Arab leaders over the decades have showed a deep hostility for the Jewish homeland and for the idea of a Zionist enterprise in the Holy Land. It was the Arab leaders who in 1947 rejected the United Nations partition plan, which would have created two states in the Holy Land, one Arab-Palestinian, one Jewish homeland. And the Arab leaders have shown little empathy over the years for people devastated by annihilation and Holocaust in Europe. The Arab states are responsible for their own failures to build democratic institutions for peace, and for the legacy of incitement and hatred marshaled against Israel, which is really one of the dismal failures of the modern Middle East. But this book is about Israeli military culture. Once in the military system, Israelis never fully exit. They carry the military identity for life. Every family is vested in the military by virtue of the fact that they send their high school graduates off for 3 long years of service in the Army, the Air Force, or the Navy. And when they return, they continue to serve in the reserves until the age of 49. In Israel, the military is the most trusted institution. The Army and the intelligence services dominate the national budget. They define the internal and external threats to national security. They review their own performance. They staff government offices. They control vast amounts of the economy by virtue of the military industries. They control landscape. They control airspace. And they run a significant operation to censor the news media. In the course of doing the research for this book, I met with dozens of Israeli generals, former intelligence chiefs, and political figures, many of whom subscribe to a strong militaristic outlook. In their theory of human behavior, the worst-case scenario is not just one of several possible outcomes. It's the only possible outcome. At the same time, I was surprised to find so many military officials who advocated a more diplomatic approach and who were concerned that the military establishment was becoming too hardline, too religious, and too contemptuous of any competing institution, especially those devoted to diplomacy and negotiation. Just as the American defense establishment tended to exaggerate the Soviet threat during the Cold War, just as President Eisenhower grappled with what he called the military-industrial complex, Israel seems to be under the influence of a military elite and an extensive defense bureaucracy, which find it extremely reluctant to engage the Arab and Muslim worlds in the processes of peace. The origins of this military culture cannot be understood without understanding the group of military leaders who coalesced around David Ben-Gurion in the first decade of the Jewish state. Many of these young men describe themselves as sabras, a name taken from the tough cactus that hangs from the rocks of the Mediterranean coast. They had gained their military experience by fighting during World War II, either for the British Army or in the Jewish underground. Moshe Dayan, the one-eyed general who became David Ben-Gurion's favorite, was the prototype. A thoroughly secular man, Dayan began fighting Arabs as a teenager with fists and knives. And as he grew older, he read the Old Testament obsessively, because for him, it was a manual for war. The debate and the struggle over peace or war with the Arabs that began in that first decade of the Jewish state is relevant to today, as Israel's military establishment prepares for war with Iran. What is missing is any countervailing institution that could balance the military zeitgeist, the military option, with an imaginative and engaging diplomacy for peace. So here's the rub for this extraordinary military society. A Sparta that we have long thought of as a small and endangered Athens. If you only build the institutions of war and forego the institutions of negotiation, compromise, accommodation, and integration, peace will remain elusive.